I've been working on my 3D platformer for about 2 to 3 months now, and the game has changed 4 times. But this video series will be a devlog showing you the entire process. In this video, I'll be describing what I'm making, how my game changed 4 times throughout the course of development, and how you can avoid that happening to yourself. So what's the game idea? This game is a 3D platformer that has emerged between 2 games as the main influence. The first influence would be Mario Sunshine. Second influence would be Sonic Adventure 2. Growing up during the GameCube era, both of these games were incredible and kind of set the tone for the genre going forward, but neither game is perfect. For example, the 3 playstyles that you have in Sonic Adventure is completely unnecessary. I don't know anyone who loves all 3 playstyles. None of the 3 concepts feel fully fleshed out, but the game relies on pacing of the 3 to kind of cover for that, while Mario Sunshine feels as if it wasn't sure if it wanted to be a new game or a Mario game. Flood replaced a lot of Mario's core moves, and it wasn't exactly an improvement on the franchise. The entire game feels like a spin-off as opposed to a main title. Neither game is perfect, but they are both staple games in their series, and they left an impression on me and a lot of other kids during that time. The idea for my game I had borrows heavily from both games to create something new and a bit different from the traditional 3D platformer. Now I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of 3D platformers. If I had to pick my favorite genre of games, I doubt it would make my top 5. I haven't played a lot of 3D platformers people love and adore. Some I have played, I hate, to be honest with you. Some examples are Spyro, Jak and Daxter, Crash Bandicoot, pretty much any PlayStation sort of 3D platformer during the PS1 and PS2 era. In fact, I like so few 3D platformers that you might be asking yourself, why are you making a 3D platformer? But that's exactly why. Because I hate them. I want to try and make a 3D platformer that I actually like and that appeals to me and people like me. While not my favorite game genre, some 3D platformer games are some of my favorite games of all time. Games like Banjo-Kazooie, Mario 64, Jet Set Radio. Hopefully, at the very least, if you're a fan of 3D platformers in general, this game should be somewhat interesting to you, and I'm just hoping that I can capture what I believe are the best features in these types of games. See, some of my least favorite things about the genre seem to be the core to other games, like collectibles, quirky characters, a fun companion, but those are not really as important to me. If you look at the list I gave you of Mario 64 or Jet Set Radio, these games don't really have those features as core mechanics. And to be fair, I didn't start this idea trying to make a 3D platformer. I actually wanted to make a totally different game idea, and in the course of my 4 iterations, it turned into a 3D platformer. See, this game started out as a remake of my first game that I ever made. First game I made was a game called Phantom Maze. I made it in a week on this channel as my first video. It was basically a game where you enter into a maze and you have to kind of find your way out. It was the first thing I ever finished regardless of the quality, and I made it in about a week's time. So I wanted to take that idea and kind of increase the movement abilities in that game, kind of have it be a first-person parkour game set in a maze. I really wanted to play with that idea of freedom of movement, but a limited environment. I wanted my game to feel like Indiana Jones in a ghost maze, where you can, rope over the walls, set traps, and kind of slide through the hole before the wall closes and run from the boulder. And I really wanted to have a great time with this idea. But everything changed when feature creep came in. See, the game scope was never meant to be a big game, but there was a fine line between being passionate about your game and being ambitious about it. Nobody gets excited for simple games. I've said that several times on this channel and throughout my journey. And remaking my old game is not going to excite the passion unless I put a lot of new content or new ideas into the game. It's kind of hard to walk that line with adding new stuff without overdoing the original concept. Now, I had 2 choices. I could stick to the original idea, just add a couple features, remake the game at a higher level, or I could try to make this large game, but in reality, who wants to spend 3 months making a really fancy cheese and crackers, right? Instead of trying to actually make a quality project worth someone's time and money, especially if I was going to try to sell this game, right? If I wouldn't buy it, why would I expect you guys to buy it? I remembered I had an idea for a 2D platformer years back. It was called Ship's Wreckage. In this game, your character would land on this world and have to find a way off the planet without any resources. You would have to craft a ship, you would have to build shelter, you would have to gather food. This game never got past the prototype stage. It just was squares on the screen, but I figured I would make the idea instead of the maze game because it seemed like something that was exciting but less ambitious. Then I realized while I was making this prototype for the second iteration of my game that this game would require crafting. What if you were to take crafting and merge that with a 3D platformer instead of an adventure game? How cool would it be to collect items and use them as crafting materials like in other games? To be honest, it sounds a lot better than it actually is. I realized that this would create what's called a cursed problem. Cursed problems are when you have two competing interests in a game, and the game itself doesn't really align with one playstyle. In my case, platformers view collectibles as guides, as end goals, as kind of rewards, while crafting games view them as essentials, necessary items, and resources. Now, I was right that there was some interest in these two games merging because they both rely on collectibles. However, the way they use collectibles is what makes it a difficult thing to merge together. While I was looking at this idea and trying to figure out how to make a good game out of these concepts, I realized that this would be entirely out of scope. So I removed the crafting to simply focus on the 3D platformer aspect of the game and see what I could make out of it. Suddenly I found myself making an open world 3D platformer in which you're shipwrecked on an island, and the idea just felt very lost and confused. I had shifted away from being passionate and ambitious over to being safe and secure. This idea was nowhere near as interesting as I wanted it to be, and I had been spending some time on this channel learning how to plan my games. So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna actually use some of these tools that I've been learning. Now, what I found that worked for me was building design pillars. Design pillars are used to key in on what's important about your game. Games have a ton of mechanics and ideas, but there are a few core pillars each game is supported by. A game like Street Fighter 6 has added customization, story mode, and a whole lot of other things to their new game. But the design pillars of Street Fighter are still the combat. That's never changed, right? That's the entire point of the game. I needed to define what was the core of my game. I wanted to create a traditional 3D platformer with fun movement, but I wanted to change how the game was structured. I didn't want a game where you would go from point A to point B to collect the star or the jiggy or the whatever. Armed with these two things, I changed my game's concept again. I began working on abilities for the character such as levitation, teleportation, flash step. I spent a lot of time working on the game here at this point. In fact, this is the longest section of development up to this point of this game, where the game kind of resembled sort of like a magical 3D platformer. I was almost sure that this would be the final iteration of the idea. My design pillars now were fun movement, non-traditional 3D platformer, and magic. You would explore parts of the island, gain new spells, use movement abilities, but there was a big problem. The game just didn't feel right or interesting still. I was getting closer to the fun, but further away from the cool. So during this time I was working on the core abilities and the core mechanics of the game. I was also trying to figure out what I can add to the idea to make the game more interesting. I didn't want to add a bunch of lore or background to try to force the game to be interesting. I wanted it to just kind of make sense, you know? And this is where it led me back to my game ideas video. In order to come up with some new game ideas, I went online to try to find out what people say about it. Thing is, none of these really worked for me. It kind of felt more like a brainstorming exercise, and then you would take that route and then make an actual idea from that. So it was helpful, but it didn't really solve my problem, right? I basically came up with my own method for generating cool ideas, and I'll share with you what I used. Hopefully it's helpful to other people. This is a two-step process. One step I call the create. The create is basically where you have to take a root idea. It can be another game that you really like. It could be a art asset or whatever, who cares? It needs to have something that you want to start with. Take that root idea and we're going to do one of 4 things to it. One is combine. We're going to take 2 things and find a way to mix them together. The second one would be subtract, which I think is really interesting. Take elements out of something and imagine what it would be like removing those elements. For example, if you take the ball away from football, how would the game play? If you remove guns from Call of Duty and it was just hand-to-hand combat in a first-person game like that, how would that game play? Would you need different combat styles? Would you need different speeds and strengths? Would you need different types of characters, smaller and bigger? Remove something and then try to envision what it would look like without that thing, right? The third would be to add, which is very different from combine, right? Take something you already like and add to it. Take the idea of football again, but this time add 2 balls onto the court instead of 1. A great example would be chess boxing or 8-player Smash Brothers. These are concepts that took the original idea and kind of turned it up a notch, right? To get a totally different game mode or idea. The final thing would be to multiply, or kind of to explain it better would be to amplify. Take a core idea and amplify it to make it extreme, right? Focus on realistic shooting mechanics, focus on realistic movement mechanics, amplify it, push it to the max. Another great example of amplifying an idea would be NBA Street. Amplifies the cool dribbling of basketball, the fancy moves, the flair of playing basketball. But then you have NBA Live, which focuses on the simulation of basketball, which is the play calling and the strategy of it, right? These are the same exact idea, but they're amplifying different parts of an idea. So what I did is basically take the core idea and do one of these 4 things multiple times. You end up with a very hectic idea. So for example, if you were to take football again and you focus in on the violence of football, but you also want to focus in on the simulation of football. So you subtract out the single player aspect of it, you add in fantasy elements to the game, you add in kind of special abilities to the game, and then you're left with a game like Blood Bowl, right? Blood Bowl is basically a football simulator game that is very bloody, filled with orcs and elves and magic and World of Warcraft, right? But you're not done there. Your game idea might be very sloppy and abstract this way. The next step is to simplify the idea. So what I did is I came up with a prompt, a writing prompt, and you just fill in everything you know about your game to answer these questions. You simplify your game down to a description and elevator pitch, if you will, of your idea, which will help you explain it to other people and to yourself. So the prompt basically goes like this. This game is a blank genre game. You play as a blank character, where you have to do blank thing in order to complete blank objective. The game is set in a blank world or environment, and in this environment or world, you have to, will, encounter, get to, whatever adjective you want. In this game, you have to do blank interesting thing. This is the best system I was able to come up with to generate the idea and kind of fix stagnant ideas that kind of don't make sense or is too much going on. Using this with the design pillars really helped me come down with what my game is, what it was missing. Maybe I came up with a cool character and a mechanic, but I didn't know where the game was going to be set in, right? Filling out this prompt kind of makes it clear what are the large pieces that you're missing about your idea. And you know what? I didn't come up with this idea fully by myself. I stole it from Steam descriptions. That's right, if you go to Steam and you look at a description of a game, this is basically how they describe their games. And I'll show you what I mean. So we'll do an example of Hollow Knight. This game is a Metrovania game where you play as a bug knight, where you have to explore Hollow Nest, a fallen kingdom plagued by disease, in order to save the kingdom from the old gods, or whatever the objective of Hollow Knight is. This world is set in a dark fantasy, nest-like kingdom. In this game, you get to explore twisting caverns, battle tainted creatures, befriend bizarre bugs while using your needle sword. This sounds familiar because it's basically word for word from the Steam description of Hollow Knight. That's right, the exact Steam description of Hollow Knight is forge your own path in Hollow Knight, an epic action adventure through a vast ruined kingdom of insects and heroes. Explore twisting caverns, battle tainted creatures, and befriend bizarre bugs, all in a classic hand-drawn 2D style. This description basically checks all the boxes that I just said. So what's my game idea? So for the 4th iteration, I used this method, and without spoiling too much of what the game is yet, this is what I came up with. A 3D platformer. I don't want to spoil the entire idea yet because I will be introducing aspects of it throughout these devlogs. But it did help me kind of solidify the game and change it completely to something totally different. Now that I went through that whole process and I kind of know what it is that I'm making, I can now focus on how to actually put the game together and make a vertical slice of the game. The first thing I had to do was remove a lot of the magic from the game. I had went through and created a main character that I wouldn't be able to use. I added a spell book that I wouldn't be able to use, a ton of particle effects, and I stripped all of that out, which was frustrating, but it was good because now I know what I'm actually making, right? I also didn't mind this because my overall modeling skills are becoming more than I ever hoped that they would be. I never wanted to be a 3D modeler or anything of that nature. I would say that right now I'm somewhat serviceable to make like a low poly stuff. Just don't look at my models up close. So I went back, I modeled a brand new character, and once I had my new character, I started developing some new mechanics that kind of fit the new theme of the game. I would need to add things like the jetpack and other things, but overall, let me explain a little more about what the game is. The game is basically a 3D platformer that borrows the FLUDD from Mario Sunshine and merges that with the treasure hunting levels from Sonic Adventure 2. My favorite level in Sonic Adventure 2 is Pumpkin Hill. I love all the treasure hunting levels with Knuckles and Rouge, and I really enjoyed FLUDD from Mario Sunshine, but I wanted to change it up a little bit. The hover nozzle is the weakest point of FLUDD. I think everyone enjoyed kind of the better movement mechanics like the triple jump with Mario. FLUDD hover nozzle was not the greatest, but I was able to take the hover mechanics and merge that with the gliding from Sonic Adventure 2. So you kind of get this like hovery glide mechanic thing that I've been working on, and I think it works a lot better than how it existed in Mario Sunshine. So I went about adding all of these new mechanics of this new FLUDD-ish, new Mario Sunshine type mechanics, and also the kind of mechanics from the treasure hunting levels. Like before I knew it, I had a little playground to run around in and test some mechanics, and it was really starting to put together an interesting idea for a game. The one thing that I'm kind of stuck on right now for this game is the water mechanic from Mario Sunshine, the ability to shoot water from your water pack. I don't know if it's fun yet, right? I think most of the fun from that is really just using the nozzles to move around the game as opposed to using them to shoot at creatures. It really felt like a chore in Mario Sunshine to use it, and I kind of want to remove that because it doesn't make sense thematically as well. So finally, I had my idea down, my focus for the game design, and I had to start putting it together and sort of key mechanics for the game, so it was starting to feel like an actual game. You know your game is on the right track and you can't stop playtesting it for the smallest little things. And that's where I'm currently at right now in the process. I remade this game basically 4 times. I got lost in the process. I almost gave up. And the best thing is I didn't quit. I went online, I researched on how I can come up with a new idea. I've made up my own tools on how to come up with new ideas. Pretty much whatever I gotta do to keep going. I think that's the most important thing that I want to bring to these devlogs is inspiration, and say that a person like me who doesn't know anything about how to program can make games, and so can you guys. So in the future you can expect at least 1 devlog a month from me from this game. I don't know when it'll be finished, but I know it won't take a year because progress is already moving somewhat fast. So in the next devlog I will be going over the levels that I've made and some of the mechanics that I've worked on, kind of show you guys some really cool things and kind of see what you guys think of the overall game idea. So I appreciate you guys watching the video. Take care. Peace. I'm so sick right now.